Welcome to HFY Vanguard. An alien girl set her final test seduction, but the human protector failed it with her. Let's begin. Lady Inara Nyx stood at the wide arc of crystal that formed the viewing wall of her private chambers, her slender, azure hands clasped lightly behind her back. Beyond the transparent barrier, the eternal ocean of stars stretched in an infinite scatter of white fire against the black. A faint pulse of nebula light bathed her chambers in hues of violet and rose, but she paid little attention to its beauty. She had seen such views all her life. The galaxy was her marketplace, its empires, her rivals, its trade routes, her veins of wealth. What unsettled her tonight was not the endless void, it was the human she had recently invited into her orbit. Her snow-white hair fell in careful cascades pinned at the temple, with silver combs encrusted with emeralds mined from the twin moons of Nexus. Every detail of her presentation was a weapon: her gown of green silk woven with threads of starlight, the fur trim at her shoulders that whispered wealth, the faint perfume derived from blossoms cultivated in the acid gardens of Torix. She was elegance incarnate, and she knew it. Yet beneath the surface of poise and control, unease gnawed at her. On the desk behind her floated a series of holographic panes. Each showed dossiers, images, and intelligence briefings gathered at her command. Her latest acquisition, a bodyguard from Earth. The profile hovered glowing faintly in her dim chamber. Human, male, scarred, dangerous. "Display Candidate 7 again," she said, her voice cutting the silence with the sharpness of authority. The holographic panes shifted, and the image of a man materialized. He stood tall, shoulders squared, arms folded in a stance that suggested both readiness and defiance. His face was not conventionally handsome, too severe, too weathered, but his eyes caught her attention even in static projection. Gray, sharp as fractured ice, unyielding. And then there was the scar, an ugly lattice running from cheekbone to brow, a reminder of survival, not defeat. Hank Dunn, the file read. Former Terran Defense Force Special Operations. Multiple decorations, dishonorably discharged under circumstances classified by Terran Command. Inara narrowed her eyes. Classified. Even her wealth and influence could not unseal those records. That alone made her wary. Humans she had long believed were unpredictable, emotional creatures prone to extremes of loyalty or betrayal, brilliance or destruction. The rest of the galactic community had tolerated their rise only because humanity's stubborn refusal to die had proven useful in wars and crises. They were dangerous precisely because they did not know when to yield. A chime broke her thoughts. "My lady came," the voice of her steward filtered through the chamber intercom. "The human has arrived. Send him in." The doors whispered open, and the figure from the hologram stepped into reality. His presence filled the chamber in a way the projection never could. Dark armor of Terran make clung to his frame, functional, efficient, lacking the artistry Taurian armorers considered essential. At his hip hung a compact pulse pistol, its grip worn smooth with use. She was certain more weapons lay hidden on his person. His movements were economical, a predator conserving energy. "Lady Nyx," he said with a nod, not quite a bow. His tone was respectful but carried no trace of servility. "Mr. Dunn," she replied coolly. "I trust your journey was uneventful." "As uneventful as a trip through pirate-infested space can be," he answered with the faintest quirk of his mouth. "Your escort ships are efficient." She circled him slowly, each step measured, watching how his gaze tracked her, while simultaneously assessing exit angles and potential threats. Not once did his attention falter. His composure was absolute. Most guards, even trained Taurian elites, betrayed unease under her scrutiny. This human gave her nothing but an unreadable wall. "Your credentials are impressive," she said at last, "though I find it curious that a man of such skill would take employment as a private bodyguard." "The private sector pays better," he replied evenly. "Does it trouble you to serve a non-human employer?" "I fought beside Centurions, Proxians, and even a Taurian or two," Dunn said. "Species matters less to me than character." Diplomatic or honest, she could not decide which. "You understand, Mr. Dunn, that this position requires absolute loyalty. My affairs are complex. Some are not aligned with conventional regulation." I'm not here to be your conscience, Lady Nix, he said without flinching. Just to keep you alive. For the first time, a small smile touched her lips. His bluntness was refreshing, if dangerous. Very well. My steward will show you to your quarters. You begin immediately. Dunn inclined his head. He turned to leave, but she called after him. One more thing. Trust is earned in my household. Until you have earned mine, expect to be tested. He paused at the doorway, glancing over his shoulder. I'd be disappointed if you didn't. When he was gone, Inera lingered by the viewport. The memory of his unflinching gray eyes gnawed at her carefully constructed certainties. Taurian males she had hired before were disciplined, predictable, even dull. This human radiated danger, yes, but also something far more unsettling, an independence that refused to bend. She tapped her communicator. Villain, she said to her steward, monitor the human closely, set up the usual tests. As you wish, my lady. Shall we begin with the misplaced valuables? Yes, she murmured. Let us see how honest our new guardian truly is. The following weeks unfolded like a chess match she had arranged against herself. Each move, each trap was designed to provoke weakness, expose a character. Yet the human moved with infuriating precision. The misplaced security codes reappeared on her desk without commentary. He had found them, secured them, and said nothing. The assistant she had sent, attractive, practiced in seduction, was politely rebuffed with a level of courtesy that felt almost insulting. The staged assassination attempt had ended in embarrassment. Dunn had reacted with lethal efficiency, neutralizing the would-be killer in seconds. The assassin spent 2 days in a medical bay recovering. Inera's frustration grew with every failed ploy. He was either exceptionally competent or exceptionally cunning. She could not decide which answer unsettled her more. On the evening of a grand reception, she found herself pacing her chambers. Representatives from 7 trading houses awaited her downstairs, eager to strike deals. Yet her mind lingered not on tariffs or contracts, but on Dunn's unreadable composure. Perhaps tonight, she told herself, the matter would be settled. A final test. She opened her private vault, withdrawing a small velvet pouch. Inside gleamed 12 gold coins, ancient Terran artifacts, relics from before humanity's spacefaring era. Worth a fortune to collectors, they represented temptation in its purest form. She placed the pouch conspicuously on her desk, then summoned her steward. Ensure that Mr. Dunn is assigned to my chambers this evening, she instructed, and make certain he is aware of my carelessness with these valuables. The steward bowed. Of course, my lady. As the reception swelled below with laughter, bargaining, and veiled threats disguised as compliments, Inera excused herself and slipped away. She moved silently through the quarters of her estate, approaching her private rooms. At the corner, she activated a surveillance device. The corridor unfolded before her in miniature projection. Dunn stood at attention beside her adore posture, alert eyes scanning. Perfect. She triggered a false security alert in the East Wing, a minor disturbance but enough to require his attention. She watched him receive the signal, hesitate briefly, then stride away down the corridor. The moment he vanished, she slipped inside and concealed herself behind an ornate screen. Now to wait. Minutes passed. Her heart traitorously beat faster. Then he returned, moving with the same predator's awareness. He checked the corridor, then entered her chambers. Straight to the desk. He picked up the pouch. Inera's pulse spiked. Got you, she whispered, anticipation sharp in her chest. But instead of pocketing the treasure, Dunn drew a small sack from his armor, slid the coins inside, and crossed the room to her safe. With unerring precision, he keyed the sequence, her private code one she had never shared. The lock disengaged. He placed the pouch inside, sealed the safe, and resumed his post as though nothing had happened. Inera stared from her hiding place, her carefully laid assumptions unraveling. How had he known the code? Why secure the treasure instead of seizing it? This human was no mere guard. He was something else entirely. Inera did not reveal herself immediately. She remained behind the carved screen, her breathing controlled, her pulse stubbornly quickened. In all her careful planning, she had imagined 2 possible outcomes, theft or indifference. The human had chosen neither. Instead, he had secured the treasure as if it were his own responsibility, using knowledge he should not have possessed. A dozen scenarios tangled in her mind. Perhaps the steward had been careless and shared the code. Perhaps Dunn had broken into her systems and stolen it. Or more troubling still, perhaps he had simply deduced it. Taurian codes, after all, often followed patterns rooted in numerology, cultural symbols, or family histories. Could a human have noticed what her own rivals never had? She stepped out from behind the screen, deliberately letting her heels click against the polished obsidian floor. "My Lady Dunn," said at once, turning to face her. He did not flinch, did not startle. His voice carried no guilt, only calm acknowledgement. "I thought you were with your guests." "Clearly," she replied, coldly advancing, until she stood before the desk. "What were you doing at my safe?" "Securing your property," he answered without hesitation. "You accessed my private vault without authorization." "Your steward provided the code when I was hired," Dunn said. His tone was flat, matter-of-fact. "Standard protocol. I'm to ensure valuables aren't left unsecured." Inara's eyes narrowed. She had trained herself to detect micro-expressions, subtle shifts of breath or muscle that betrayed deception. Yet his face was maddeningly neutral. "And the coins, safer in your vault than on your desk during a reception attended by 50 strangers." The logic was impeccable, yet part of her bristled at his presumption. It was her vault, her desk, her test. And still he had turned the trap inside out. "Return to your post," she said at last, dismissing him with a wave. He inclined his head and stepped back into the hall. That night, as the last guest departed, Inara lay awake in her chambers. Her mind replayed the scene endlessly, the surety of his movements, the calm in his voice, the absence of fear in his eyes. She could not decide if she was frustrated, intrigued, or both. Perhaps one more test was required. Something direct, something he could not sidestep with logic or protocol. The following morning, she summoned him to her private study. The room was smaller than her audience chamber, but no less lavish. Shelves of crystal-bound ledgers lined the walls, and a decanter of Taurian brandy, 3 centuries old, rested on a carved pedestal. Dunn arrived on time as always. His dark armor polished his scar, catching the light. He stood at ease before her desk, hands clasped loosely behind his back, eyes steady. "You wanted to see me, Lady Nick?" "I do," she said, rising from her chair. The emerald folds of her gown rustled softly as she circled the desk. She stopped just before him, close enough that by Taurian custom the gesture was intimate, even confrontational. "Last night you accessed my safe." "As I explained," "Yes," she cut in, "to secure valuables, a commendable explanation, if it were true." A flicker. Just a flicker of irritation crossed his scarred features before he smoothed it away. "You doubt my motives." "I doubt everything, Mr. Dunn. Doubt is why I still breathe." She poured 2 glasses of brandy, its golden liquid catching the morning light. With a delicate tilt, she offered one to him. He hesitated, then accepted. "You've been testing me," he said, not as a question, but as a statement. Her lips curved faintly. "Of course. The misplaced codes, the staged assassin, the wandering hands of my assistant. You noticed? I'd be dead if I didn't notice patterns." He sipped the brandy just enough to show appreciation without indulgence. "And last night's test with the coins. How did you know it was a test?" His gray eyes almost gleamed with amusement. "Lady Nick's every Taurian employer I've worked for has tried some version of the valuables left unattended test. You're methodical to the point of predictability." Predictability. The word stung. "Yet you're not predictable," he added, which made it interesting. She circled him again, each step deliberate. "You could have left the coins where they were." "That would have been the wrong answer too," he said calmly. "A competent guard doesn't leave valuables exposed during a gathering of potential competitors." You weren't just testing honesty but judgment. For the first time in years, Inara found herself smiling. Not the calculated smile of diplomacy, but something unbidden. "You're more perceptive than I expected." "It's my job to anticipate threats," he said. "Sometimes the threat is an assassin. Sometimes it's an employer's mistrust." His words carried a subtle rebuke, one she could not deny. Her methods were conventional, and he had seen through them all. She set her glass down and faced him squarely. "Then let us dispense with game. Why did you truly accept this position? With your skills, you could command far greater pay elsewhere." For the first time, he hesitated. "The pay is good, but the position allows me certain flexibilities." Explain. I have commitments beyond my employment. His voice remained steady, but his eyes hardened with quiet resolve. Each month I send a portion of my earnings to support orphans, alien children, victims of raids, wars, border disputes. The words hit her like a blow. You support alien orphans. I send what I can. Food, medicine, educational materials. It's not enough, but it helps. Inera searched his face, expecting a hint of deception. There was none. Only sincerity stripped of pretense. Why, she asked. The word came out sharper than intended. Because someone should. Silence filled the study. For the first time since their acquaintance began, she felt off balance. Taurian society valued strength, wealth, status. Charity was weakness. To give without expectation of return was unthinkable. And yet this human stood before her unapologetic. She forced her composure back into place. I see. But she did see too clearly. His actions undermined her worldview, challenged assumptions she had never questioned. The test she had crafted to expose his flaws had instead exposed her own blind spots. Dunn set his glass on her desk with quiet finality. Lady Nix, you've spent 3 weeks trying to catch me stealing, lying, or betraying you. It's inefficient. If you don't trust me, dismiss me. If you want to keep testing me, at least make the test worthy of both of us. Inera stiffened at his audacity, but beneath the indignation stirred a pulse of respect. Few dared speak so directly to her. Fewer still survived doing so. You find my methods lacking. I find them conventional, he said simply. And you strike me as anything but conventional. The comment struck deeper than she expected. For the first time in years, she felt seen not as a merchant, not as a manipulator, but as a person. She masked the feeling with a cool smile. Very well, Mr. Dunn, perhaps we can start anew. She extended her hand, adopting the human gesture of agreement. For a heartbeat, he seemed surprised, then clasped it firmly. His hand was warm, calloused, steady. Then welcome properly to my service, she said. Thank you, Lady Nix. The moment stretched, charged with something neither acknowledged aloud. She withdrew her hand, retreating behind professional composure. Report to the security office. We have business in the Proxima sector next week. He nodded, turning to leave. At the doorway, he paused. One question, if I may. Yes, the orphans. Would you object if I continued my support while in your service? Some employers worry about divided loyalties. For once, words did not come easily. Something tightened in her chest, unfamiliar and unwelcome. Your charitable activities are your own concern, Mr. Dunn, as long as they do not interfere with your duties. They won't, he said, and his gratitude was genuine. When the door closed behind him, Inera remained staring at the polished surface of her desk, her own reflection fractured by the holographic interface. A human who spent his earnings on alien children. A bodyguard who turned every test into a lesson not about him, but about herself. Perhaps there was more to Hank Dunn and to humanity than she had ever been led to believe. 3 days after their candid confrontation, Lady Inera Nix found herself distracted in ways that unsettled her. She was accustomed to focusing with razor intensity during trade negotiations, weighing tariffs and contracts like blades on a scale. Yet as she faced the Proxian delegates in her council chamber, her thoughts kept drifting to her human bodyguard. Hank Dunn stood silently at the periphery. Armored in his usual dark attire, posture relaxed but ready. He blended into the background as any bodyguard should, yet Inera felt his presence like a star's pull. Subtle, constant, impossible to ignore. Every time their eyes met across the chamber, a flicker of warmth coursed through her chest, a sensation so alien it left her off balance. When the meeting ended and her guest departed, she lingered by her secure terminal. The thought that had haunted her since their conversation pressed at her mind until she yielded. She spoke the command aloud. Computer track financial records for Hank Dunn. Trace all outgoing transfers since his employment began. The machine hummed, sifting through encrypted channels until rows of numbers unfolded in the air. Nearly 40% of his earnings were routed to an account in the Epsilon sector, a region scarred by the hive wars and now plagued with poverty. Identify recipient, she ordered. The reply chimed back at once: Hope Harbor Sanctuary, classification charitable organization, primary function care and education of displaced juveniles. Inera leaned back in her chair, her fingers drumming the polished obsidian desk. Dunn hadn't exaggerated, if anything he had understated. The sums he sent away were substantial, more than many Taurian nobles would part with in a lifetime. Display records for Hope Harbor. Images flickered to life. A modest compound on a dusty moon. Children of varying species played in a rough courtyard. Proxians with ridged brows. Centurions with multiple arms, pale-skinned Taurians whose eyes shone too brightly. Their laughter seemed to echo through the sterile projection. Inara's breath caught. Something about the architecture tugged at memory. She zoomed in on the main building, its curved frame, the angle of its windows, the distinctive mineral-veined stone. Recognition struck like a blade. Cross-referenced this facility with Nick's trading company assets. The computer complied, and the answer landed with cruel precision. Match found. Property designation mining outpost E17. Status decommissioned. Sold to private entity 7 standard years ago. Inara froze. The orphanage operated in one of her company's abandoned mining stations. The coincidence was too sharp, too deliberate. Identify purchasing entity. Terran Veterans Coalition. Humans, of course. She closed her eyes, considering. The upcoming trip to the Proxima sector would bring her ship within range of Epsilon 9. A minor detour would allow her to investigate. It was, she told herself, due diligence. If her bodyguard's charity operated in one of her former holdings, she had a responsibility to understand the implications. But even as she gave the order to her captain, she knew her reasons were not purely pragmatic. Curiosity tugged at her, and beneath it something warmer, something she refused to name. 2 days later, the Azure Empress descended through thin atmosphere, its sleek hull gleaming against the reddish dust of Epsilon 9. Inara stood at the viewing port of the bridge Dunn beside her. His eyes widened slightly as the compound came into view. Epsilon 9, he murmured. Hope Harbor. He turned to her, surprise breaking through his professional mask. May I ask why we're here, Lady Nix? She studied him, savoring the flicker of emotion she had coaxed from him at last. I believe you are familiar with this moon. He stiffened. I am. You didn't mention that your orphans were housed in a former Nix trading facility. I wasn't aware you required a full accounting of the property's history, he said carefully. The coalition purchased it legally. I don't question its legality. She stepped closer, close enough to catch the subtle quickening of his breath. I find it intriguing that our paths crossed long before I hired you. His mouth quirked faintly. The universe has a strange sense of humor. Inara found herself returning the smile. Indeed, since we are here, I'd like to see this sanctuary of yours. Surprise flickered again, quickly masked. You want to visit Hope Harbor. Is that a problem? No, he admitted after a pause. But it's not what I expected from someone of your station. You presume to know what I would find interesting? She asked with raised brow. His eyes glinted with the ghost of amusement. Not at all. I'm simply adjusting my understanding of you. The words sent a strange thrill through her, though she dismissed it at once. Then let us proceed. The landing pad was little more than a patch of clear dust. As the shuttle's hatch opened, the scent of dry stone and faint ozone rushed in. Inara descended with regal poise, her gown trailing lightly, her white hair glinting beneath the harsh sunlight. Children froze in their play to stare. Some gawked openly, others whispered behind small hands. A few recognized Dunn and ran to him, their voices breaking into delighted greetings. Inara watched unsettled as the stern human bent to their level, letting them tug at his arms, laughing softly at their chatter. She had never seen him so unguarded. It was as if he carried two selves, the predator, who moved like a shadow at her side, and the gentle protector who belonged here among children. An older human woman emerged from the main building. Her hair streaked with silver, her face lined with weather. She smiled warmly at Dunn, embracing him, before turning to Inara with respectful composure. Lady Nix Dunn said formally, allow me to present Director Kelly. She oversees Hope Harbor. An unexpected honor, Kelly said, bowing. Welcome to our sanctuary. Thank you, Inara replied, dipping her chin in regal acknowledgement. I hope you don't mind the unannounced visit. I was curious about Mr. Dunn's charitable interests. Not at all, Kelly said with a smile. We are always glad of visitors. Please allow me to show you around. The facility was simple but clean. Dormitories lined with neat bunks, classrooms equipped with battered but functioning educational terminals. Kitchens that smelled of herbs and nutrient stew. Anera noted the wear of the infrastructure, the cracks in walls, long since patched. Yet she also noticed the care with which everything was maintained. The children were healthy, their eyes bright, their bellies full. As they walked, Kelly explained, most of our charges lost their families in border conflicts or pirate raids. Here they find shelter, education, and the chance to rebuild. Anera listened with polite detachment, but her gaze kept drifting to Dunn. He was surrounded constantly. Centurion children clambered onto his broad arms, a Proxian boy tugged at his hand to show a puzzle he had completed. And Dunn responded to each with patience and warmth, his expression softening in a way Anera would not have believed possible. It unsettled her more than any of her tests had. Then came the moment that pierced deeper than she expected. Near a storage container at the compound's edge, a young Taurian girl watched from the shadows. Her skin was paler than most of Anera's kind, with a silvery sheen under the light. Her white hair was cut short, an untraditional style that marked her as different. When she realized Anera had noticed, she did not retreat. Instead, she stepped forward, eyes narrowed with recognition, far too old for her years. "You're here," the child said in accented standard. Kelly's expression tightened. "Mora, that's not how we address guests." "It's all right," Anera interrupted, intrigued. "Yes, I am here. And you are Mora." The girl nodded, fists clenched at her sides. "My mother worked in your mines on Taurus Prime. She died when the eastern shaft collapsed." The words struck like a blade to the gut. Anera remembered the incident, 17 dead, the official report attributing the collapse to geological instability. Compensation packages had been issued. The matter for her had ended there. But now the tragedy stood before her in the form of a child's unflinching gaze. "My mother said the beams were faulty," Mora continued. "She told her supervisor, but he said replacing them would delay production." Kelly moved quickly, reaching for the girl's shoulder. "Mora." "No," Anera raised a hand. "Let her speak." Mora's voice was steady, too steady. "After she died, no one from our clan would take me in. They said I was tainted by failure. Human traders found me and brought me here." Anera felt a chill spread through her. Taurian culture prized strength, success, perfection. Failure was shameful. Death in an accident was dishonor. But to hear the consequences spoken by a child, it was different. Brutal. Dunn knelt beside Mora, his massive frame folding down until his eyes met hers. "Mora has been with us nearly 2 years," he said softly. "She's one of our brightest students." The girl's stern gaze softened at his praise, but only slightly. Her eyes remained locked on Anera, piercing and accusing. Anera's throat tightened, though she forced her voice to remain steady. "I remember the incident," she said carefully. "It was a tragedy." The girl did not look away, and in her silence, Anera felt the weight of unspoken accusation heavier than any words. By the time the tour ended, Anera's composure was cracking in ways she would not admit aloud. She had walked through classrooms where children studied diligently, despite scars of war. She had seen a Taurian boy with a missing arm learning to manipulate mechanical tools with stubborn determination. She had passed a Proxian youth with burned scars, half his face laughing as he taught smaller children. Everywhere she looked, she saw resilience. And everywhere she saw Dunn's influence, his resources, his time, his steady presence. Hope Harbor was not merely a charity. It was a rebuke to everything she had believed about strength, wealth, and worth. When they returned to the landing pad, Mora stood watching, arms crossed, suspicion still etched into her young face. Anera felt the weight of that stare long after the shuttle door closed. For the first time in many years, Lady Anera Nix felt something unfamiliar: shame. The voyage back from Epsilon 9 stretched long and silent, but Anera Nix did not spend it in leisure. She sequestered herself in her private office aboard the Azure Empress, the viewing wall filled with the shifting colors of hyperspace. Yet she saw none of it. Her eyes were fixed on the projections hovering before her reports, communiques, data streams, all dragged from her company archives under her highest clearance. "Display all documentation related to Taurus Prime mining incident," she commanded. "Authorization Nix Alpha 7. The holograms obeyed, flooding her chamber with sheets of glowing text and rotating three-dimensional diagrams. She scrolled through them with her blue fingers, her gaze sharp, her posture rigid. The official report was exactly as she remembered: unexpected geological instability, sudden collapse, 17 fatalities. Compensation packages had been issued, legal inquiries had closed, and the mining consortium had moved on. But she dug deeper. Maintenance logs, requisition orders, safety inspection, notes, all buried in dusty corners of the system. At first glance, nothing unusual. Then a pattern began to emerge. The structural engineers had requested reinforcement beams. Not once, not twice, but 6 separate times. Each request had been denied. The denials all bore the same signature operations director, Krell Voss. Inera's jaw tightened. She sifted faster, linking requisitions with financial transactions. Money flowed in fat lines from Voss's personal accounts to those of the safety inspector who had certified the mine as compliant. Weeks before the collapse, her stomach turned. It was more than negligence. It was willful corruption. He had gambled with lives for production quotas, and he had bribed officials to hide it. And when the inevitable disaster came, he had let her name her company carry the stain. She clenched the edge of her desk until her knuckles paled. It had created orphans like Mora, orphans who now stared at her with silent accusation. Justice demanded action. Computer, she said through gritted teeth, flag all accounts linked to Krell Voss. Place them under surveillance. Notify Security Chief Taryn Voss is to be detained for questioning upon our return. The system chirped confirmation. Inera leaned back, closing her eyes. For once, she did not feel like the composed merchant princess of Taurian high society. She felt like a woman staring into a mirror, seeing the cost of her empire's success reflected back as broken children. She did not notice the soft hiss of the door until Hank Dunn stepped inside. His armor gleamed in the chamber's light, and for once, he wore a concession to Taurian formality, a dark green shoulder cape embroidered with her house insignia. "You wanted to see me, Lady Nick?" "Yes," she said, gesturing to the seat across from her desk. The invitation itself was a violation of Taurian protocol. Bodyguards did not sit as equals. But Dunn lowered himself without comment, though his gray eyes flickered with curiosity. "I've been investigating the Taurus Prime incident," she said without preamble. Mora was right. The support beams were faulty, and Voss knew it. He bribed the inspector to hide the truth. Dunn's jaw hardened. He scanned the projected record silently, his scar catching the glow. 17 dead, he murmured, and he walked away untouched. "Not for long. I've already ordered his arrest." "Taurian justice can be severe," Dunn said, his voice neutral. "Exile, property seizure. Sometimes worse." "Does that trouble you?" she asked sharply. "No. He made his choices knowing the risks. My concern is for you." She blinked. "Me. Voss has connections, allies who profited from his methods. By moving against him, you'll make enemies within your own company. They may strike back." It was a perspective she had not considered. She had focused on righting the injustice, not on the political backlash. Yet Dunn saw the angles she missed. That was what made him dangerous and invaluable. She allowed herself a small smile. "Then it's fortunate I have a capable bodyguard." "Always, Lady Nix," he said. The words carried no flourish, but something in the tone sent warmth unfurling in her chest. She looked away quickly, gesturing to the documents. "There is more. I've established an endowment fund for Hope Harbor. 5 million credits, enough to sustain and expand its work indefinitely." Dunn's eyes widened. For once, his composure faltered. "That's extremely generous." "It's appropriate," she corrected. "My company's negligence created some of those orphans. Supporting them is not charity. It is responsibility." Dunn studied her in silence for a long moment. Then his expression softened in a way that made her pulse quicken. "Perhaps you're more human than you realize." She almost reached out, almost touched the scar that traced his jaw, but the ship's comm system chimed. Lady Nix came the voice of Security Chief Taryn Priority Alpha. "Operations Director Voss has fled his estate. Before leaving, he accessed sensitive company files, your personal schedule, and security protocols among them." Inera shot to her feet. "Has the estate been secured?" "Yes, my lady. But we've detected unauthorized attempts to access your private accounts, including Taryn hesitated. "Including what?" "The deed transfer for the Hope Harbor facility." A chill ran down her spine. "Warn Director Kelly immediately. Place security teams en route to Epsilon 9. "Already done, my lady." Inera turned to Dunn, her voice sharp. It seems Voss means to strike at me through the things he believes I value. Hope Harbor Dunn said grimly, and perhaps you directly. We alter course, she said. Back to my estate at once. Implement protocol obsidian lockdown until I arrive. As you command, Terran replied. The transmission ended, leaving silence in its wake. And Nera became aware of Dunn watching her with an unreadable expression. That last order troubles you, she said. No, he answered slowly. It's pragmatic. Voss has shown he'll sacrifice lives for profit. He's dangerous, but what? In my experience, moments of crisis reveal a person's true character. I'm interested in what this one reveals about yours. She met his gaze, startled by the weight in his words. A challenge or an invitation, perhaps both. And what does it reveal so far, she asked carefully. That beneath the merchant princess, he said, is someone who values justice more than profit. Someone I'm proud to serve. The words hit her harder than she expected. Taurian servants did not speak of pride. It was not their place. Yet from him it felt like something she had earned. She straightened her gown, forcing composure. Prepare for arrival. If Voss has compromised my security, we must approach carefully. Dunn rose all soldier once more. I'll coordinate with your guards. As he turned to leave, she spoke without thinking. Hank. He paused, surprise flickering at her use of his first name. Thank you, she said softly, for your service and for perspective. His expression shifted, warmth touching the edges of his sternness. Perspective goes both ways, Lady Nix. When he was gone, she sat alone at her desk, replaying the sound of her own voice. The use of his first name would scandalize her peers. In Taurian culture, names were reserved for family or lovers. She should have felt compromised. Instead, she felt lighter. The feeling shattered when her private terminal chimed. A message flashed across the display. No sender identified. Text only. Your human pet has made you weak, Lady Nix. Hope Harbor is only the beginning. Everything you value will be stripped away. Then you will learn the true cost of your justice. Inera's smile vanished. Voss had made his mistake. He thought compassion a weakness. He had no idea what kind of wrath he had awakened. When the Azure Empress dropped out of hyperspace, her estate came into view. Spires of white stone rose from the sapphire sea shining in the sun. It should have been a vision of safety and control, but even from orbit, she could see something was wrong. Shuttles docked at her private landing pads bore the insignia of rival trading houses Dravik, Moral, Thaxis. Magnify Sector 4, she commanded. The projection zoomed, revealing sleek black vessels. Dunn's voice was calm but taut. It seems you have uninvited guests. Not just guests, Inera said grimly. All three of my chief rivals. A coordinated move. She accessed the estate's secure feed. Terran's face appeared taut with strain. Lady Nix, the trading houses arrived 2 hours ago, claiming an emergency consortium meeting. They presented authorization codes. Forgeries, she spat. Yes, my lady. They've convened in the Grand Council chamber with several of your board members, and Voss is with them. Dunn's eyes hardened. A hostile takeover. Precisely. Inera straightened, resolve hardening like tempered steel. We land on the secondary pad. Secure route to the council chamber. My lady Terran warned Voss has brought armed guards. So have I, she said, glancing at Dunn. His answering smile was sharp as a blade. The trap was set. The battle would be in the boardroom, not the battlefield. But blood could be spilled all the same. The shuttle touched down on the secondary landing pad with a hiss of steam and the groan of stabilizers. Inera Nix descended first, cloaked in emerald regalia lined with platinum thread. She had exchanged her travel gown for the full formal attire of her station, jeweled pins in her hair, a diadem across her brow, and the long emerald cape that symbolized her sovereignty over 3 systems. Every piece was calculated. Appear weak, and her rivals would devour her before she spoke a word. Hank Dunn followed at her side. He had not changed much, still in his black armor, weapons concealed and ready, but he had added the formal cape of her house across one shoulder. The sight of a human carrying her insignia was deliberate, defiant. It would scandalize conservative Taurians. That was the point. Security Chief Terran met them at the edge of the landing platform. His face was grim, but his voice steady. They've gathered in the council chamber, my lady. Lord Dravik, Lady Moral, and Lord Thaxis. They brought full delegations armed. Several of your own board members are with them. Bought or intimidated, Inera muttered. And Voss, in the chamber as well. He speaks as if he already holds power. Inera's lips curved in a cold smile. Let him think so. She turned to Dunn. His gray eyes were steady, unreadable. Yet she saw the steel in them, the readiness. This is no battlefield, she said softly. Every room is a battlefield, he answered. She allowed herself the faintest smile. Then she strode forward, Dunn a half-step behind her security detail, shadowing them as they made their way through the gleaming corridors of her estate. The Grand Council chamber loomed vast and echoing a cathedral of obsidian and starlight. The long table stretched like a blade, flanked by 12 board members on one side, rival House representatives on the other. At the far end sat Krell Voss, his skin a darker azure than hers, flushed with triumph. Lady Nyx, Lord Dravik said, as she entered, rising with exaggerated courtesy. His robes shimmered with the silver insignia of his house. How unexpected. We were told you were delayed in the Epsilon sector. Clearly you were misinformed, she said, coolly sweeping to the head of the table. Her cape flared behind her, her jewels glittering in the chamber's light. Dunn remained standing at her back, silent but formidable, his presence drawing uneasy glances. I am curious, she continued, lowering herself into the high seat of her station, why a consortium meeting was called without my knowledge. A matter of urgent concern, Lady Morale interjected smoothly. Her smile was poised, her eyes calculating. Director Voss has brought irregularities to our attention. Irregularities, Inera let the word drip with disdain. Voss leaned forward, savoring the moment. Your recent actions, Lady Nyx raised questions about your judgment. Diversion of company resources to human causes. Dangerous associations with alien elements. Unwise entanglements. His gaze flicked meaningfully toward Dunn. So there it was. Not only a coup, but a cultural rebuke. To consort too closely with humans was shameful to the old guard. Inera felt her jaw tighten, but she kept her voice calm. I see. And these concerns were so grave you chose to convene with my rivals rather than speak to me directly. We attempted to contact you, one of her wavering board members offered. Inera activated her wrist display. A projection filled the chamber, her communications log. No such attempts recorded. Curious. Lord Thaxus cleared his throat. Regardless, Director Voss has presented troubling evidence. A 5 million credit endowment for a human-run orphanage, for instance. Hope Harbor, Inera said, her voice sharp. A sanctuary housed in one of my former facilities. Children orphaned by industrial accidents, including those caused by negligence in my own company. She turned her gaze on Voss. Negligence that Director Voss not only permitted but concealed. The room rippled with uneasy murmurs. Voss's face darkened. Baseless accusations. Documented facts, she countered. With a flick of her wrist, financial transfers and requisition denials lit the chamber's central display. The damning record of bribes and refusals filled the air. 17 workers dead, among them the mother of a Taurian child who now lives at Hope Harbor. The silence was heavy. Even in a society that prized profit above all, the deliberate sacrifice of Taurian lives was dishonor in its purest form. Lord Dravik shifted uneasily. These allegations are serious but unproven in court. Which is why I have invited a special guest, Inera said. On cue, the chamber doors opened. Security Chief Terran entered with a nervous figure in tow, a Taurian male in administrative garb. His eyes darted around, fear plain on his face. This is Gerald Mesque, Inera announced. The inspector who certified Taurus Prime's beams. He has agreed to testify. Voss shot to his feet. This is absurd. You cannot. I can, Inera cut him off, her voice sharp as a blade, and I have. He will testify to the bribes he received from Voss in exchange for falsified reports. Panic flickered across Voss's face, quickly masked by fury. He lashed out with his final gambit. And what of your human? He stabbed a finger at Dunn, dishonorably discharged from Terran forces. His record sealed for crimes too grave to disclose. This is the man you trust at your side. The chamber stirred with gasps. Board members glanced at each other, whispering. Suspicion hung heavy. Inera felt a flare of anger. For a heartbeat, she considered silence. Let Dunn answer for himself. But then she remembered Mora's eyes, Mora's pain. And she remembered Dunn kneeling before that child with gentleness no Taurian would have shown. She rose to her feet, her voice carrying across the chamber. Yes, I trust him. More than I trust any of you who would sell your honor for profit. More than I trust men like Voss who gamble with the lives of workers and children alike. The room fell silent again. She pressed the advantage. And I can reveal more. With another command, the display shifted bank transfers, secret payments, evidence of board members taking incentives from Voss to support this very coup. Chaos erupted. Denials, accusations, threats, all crashing against one another. Enough, Lord Dravic's voice boomed, cutting through the storm. His aged features were taut, his eyes calculating. It appears we may have been misinformed. Indeed, Inera said coldly. And I wonder, Lord Dravic, whether your own operations would withstand similar scrutiny. Or yours, Lady Morale. Perhaps an independent commission should examine safety across all houses. The threat landed like a hammer. Within moments, the rival representatives began retreating into polite excuses. The tide had turned. Voss tried to rally shouting denials, but it was too late. Inera gestured and security moved to seize him. Board members who had aligned with him shrank under her gaze. This meeting, she declared, is adjourned. I expect resignation letters on my desk by morning. The chamber emptied, leaving only Inera, Dunn, and Terran. For a long moment, silence reigned. That Dunn said at last, his voice low with admiration, was masterfully done. Inera allowed herself a small smile. I had an excellent strategist. Turan saluted. The evidence is strong, my lady. Voss will face Taurian justice. Good, she said. And Hope Harbor. Secure. Our teams report no disturbances. Excellent. Leave us Terran. The chief bowed and departed. Inera moved to the viewing wall, staring out at the ocean beyond her estate. Dunn joined her closer than propriety allowed. His presence was steady grounding. You risked much today, he said. Your reputation, your company, your standing. For justice, she answered. Then softer, and perhaps for something more. His eyes met hers, questioning. When I first hired you, she said I tested you with gold coins. I thought treasure would reveal your nature. But I see now I nearly missed the true treasure that stood before me. Understanding flickered in his gray eyes. Slowly he reached out, tracing her hand with calloused fingers. Taurian culture would call this improper, she whispered. In human culture, he said, catching her hand gently, it would be called long overdue. The kiss that followed was not gentle, it was fierce, hungry, breaking every Taurian protocol. And yet it felt right. Her jewels, her cape, her empire, none of it mattered in that moment. Only the warmth of his lips, the steadiness of his embrace, the startling realization that, for once, she did not have to calculate every move. When they parted, she rested her forehead against his, her voice a murmur. The board will object. Let them, he said, that half-smile curving his mouth. They saw today what happens when they challenge you. She laughed, a sound so foreign it startled her, but also freed her. True, but changes are coming, beginning with the creation of a permanent cultural liaison, human, of course. His eyes glinted. With duties beyond diplomacy, I hope. Oh, many duties, she said, her tone laced with suggestion. But their moment of victory was short-lived. Inera's terminal chimed again. A message flashed across the display. Your human pet has made you weak, Lady Nyx. Hope Harbor is only the beginning. Everything you value will be stripped away before I am finished. The sender was unlisted. The meaning was clear. Voss had allies still. The game was not yet over. Inera's smile vanished, replaced by cold determination. He believes compassion makes me weak, she murmured. He is about to learn it makes me dangerous. The Grand Council chamber still echoed with the chaos of the coup when Inera Nyx returned to her private office. Outside, the sapphire sea glittered under twin suns, serene, as if mocking the turmoil that had just shaken her empire. She dismissed her attendants, keeping only Dunn by her side. The human silent presence steadied her, though she would never admit aloud how much she relied on it. The message from Voss still hovered above her desk, each word carved into her mind. Your human pet has made you weak. Hope Harbor is only the beginning. Inera's jaw tightened. He thought he understood her, thought compassion was a flaw. But he had miscalculated. He had made one error too many, and he had threatened the humans standing at her side and the children who had already pierced her armor. We'll return to the estate proper at once, she said, but we must assume every system has been compromised. Agreed, Dunn replied, voice calm but edged with steel. We treat every corridor like hostile ground. I'll coordinate with your loyal guards. She studied him for a moment and then nodded. See to it. The next hours were a blur of motion. Security sweeps through her estates, arrests of compromised officials, system resets. By the time night fell, the estate was locked down under Protocol Obsidian, no one in, no one out without her direct approval. Inera retired to her chambers, but sleep would not come. She found herself pacing the echo of Mora's accusing eyes in her thoughts. For the first time, the faces of the dead at Taurus Prime refused to fade. A soft knock broke her reverie. Dunn entered quietly, removing his helmet. His scarred face looked weary, but his gray eyes were as steady as ever. You should rest, he said. So should you, she countered. He gave a wry half-smile. Soldiers learn to rest standing up. She sank into a chair, gesturing to the one opposite. He hesitated, then took it. The intimacy of such a simple act struck her more than any touch of jewels or wealth. Earlier today, she said, you told me crisis reveals character. What did this one reveal about me? That beneath the armor of wealth and protocol, he said, is someone who values justice more than profit. Someone I'm proud to serve. Her throat tightened at the unexpected weight of his words. Pride was not something Taurians voiced about their superiors, but when Hank said it, it felt earned. Then perhaps she murmured, I've underestimated the value of the human perspective. He leaned closer, his gaze steady. And perhaps I've underestimated the courage of a Taurian willing to change. The silence between them thickened, charged with something unspoken. For a moment, Inera let herself imagine what it might mean to set aside her station, her rivals, her empire, and simply be a woman standing before a man who saw her as more than power. She pushed the thought aside before it could unravel her composure. We should prepare for whatever Voss plans next. He won't stop with failed boardroom theatrics. No, Dunn agreed. He'll lash out where you've shown your hand, Hope Harbor. The name alone made Inera's pulse spike. Then we'll fortify it. Not just fortify, Dunn said. We'll make sure it thrives. She met his gaze, and for the first time she realized she wasn't thinking only as a merchant guarding her interests. She was thinking as someone invested in more than profit, invested in a future that mattered. Days later, Inera's ship cut across the stars toward Epsilon 9 once more. But this time it was not a detour, it was a mission. She stood at the viewing wall of the Azure Empress, Dunn at her side, as Hope Harbor came into view. The compound looked as humble as before, but to her eyes now, it shone like a beacon. Director Kelly met them on the landing pad, lines of concern etched deeper in her weathered face. We've had disturbances, she admitted, anonymous threats, supply shipments intercepted. Nothing too severe yet, but enough to worry the children. Voss Inera said flatly. Most likely, he still has allies. He won't for long. Inera's voice carried iron. They toured the facility again, but this time Inera did not hold herself apart. She walked through dormitories, touching the bunks, speaking to children. A Proxian boy with scars shyly offered her a carved toy he'd made. A Centurion girl proudly recited a lesson she had learned. Even Mora appeared, her pale blue eyes sharp as ever. You came back, the child said, half accusation, half surprise. Yes, Inera replied, I came back. Mora crossed her arms. Why? Inera knelt so their eyes were level, ignoring how undignified the gesture would seem to her peers. Because your voice matters. Because your mother's death deserves justice. And because you deserve a future. The girl studied her for a long moment, then gave a tiny nod before vanishing back among her peers. Inera felt something loosen in her chest, something she hadn't realized was bound tight. That evening, as the children slept, Inera stood with Director Kelly in the administrative office. You said once that Hope Harbor was struggling, Inera said. What would it take to make it secure? Kelly hesitated. An endowment of 2 million credits would keep us afloat indefinitely. With 3, we could expand. But that's... She trailed off. Inera placed a data crystal on the desk. 5 million, already transferred. With conditions, education programs expanded. Medical support, increased intake widened. This sanctuary will not only survive, it will grow. Kelly's eyes widened. Lady Nix, this is not charity, Inera said firmly. Responsibility. Dunn, leaning against the wall, smiled faintly. For once, she didn't mind the warmth his approval stirred in her. But peace never lasted. Days after their return to her estate, a transmission came through a priority alert. Lady Nix Terran's voice crackled over comms. Director Voss has resurfaced. He's rallied mercenary forces, and they've been sighted near Epsilon 9. Hope Harbor. Inara's blood ran cold. Divert the fleet, she ordered. We make for Epsilon immediately. Dunn buckled his armor with swift precision. His voice was calm, but beneath it burned quiet fury. He means to strike the children. Then we'll strike him first, Inara vowed. The battle came swiftly. Voss's hired ships descended on Epsilon 9 sleek and vicious. But the Azure Empress met them with the full force of Nix Trading's private fleet. Plasma fire lit the skies, the dusty moon echoing with thunder. On the ground, Dunn led squads of Nix security repelling mercenaries who tried to breach Hope Harbor's perimeter. Inara, for one, stood at his side in armor of her own house, colors a pulse rifle in her hands. She fought with precision, if not experience, her every shot calculated. When Voss himself appeared flanked by bodyguards, Dunn moved like a storm. The clash was brutal steel against plasma scars against arrogance. You endanger children, Dunn growled as he disarmed Voss, slamming him to the ground. That's not profit, that's evil. Inara strode forward, leveling her rifle at her former director. Antorian justice does not forgive evil. Voss spat defiance, but his eyes betrayed fear. He was dragged away in chains, his rebellion crushed his mercenaries, scattering into the dust. Hope Harbor was safe. For now. That night, under the starlight of Epsilon 9, Inara and Dunn stood apart from the celebration. The children sang around fires, their laughter rising above the ruins of fear. Inara looked at Dunn, her voice low. I once thought treasure meant gold artifacts, jewels. But today I understood. Treasure is what cannot be bought. The loyalty of children who trust. The integrity of a soldier who protects. The bond of two people who refuse to break. Dunn studied her, then reached for her hand. Then you've already found your greatest treasure. She let him pull her close. The kiss they shared beneath the alien stars was softer than the one in the council chamber, but deeper, carrying the promise of more than passion, a partnership of shared future. When they parted, she rested her forehead against his whispering words that would have scandalized Taurian society. Stay with me, not just as bodyguard, as more. His answering smile was quiet, steady, and utterly human. Always Inara. And for the first time in her life, Lady Nix allowed herself to believe that the empire she built might be more than wealth and power. It might be a legacy of justice, compassion, and love.